Welcome to the corner room of the Union. I've been in a lot of the different spaces, but this is the first time I've found my way to the back corner, so I'm pretty impressed that everybody else found their way here. Well, my name is John, and it's nice to be here with you today. We have something in common. If you're alive and live in America, which most of us do at this current time, you are victims of information overload. I'm going to be talking about that and what the connection is, or the challenge is for people of faith to live in a world where they both say, I have a part of my life that needs God, and I live in a world filled with an incredible amount of information that brings challenges and questions about the nature and identity of God and the kind of things He does in our world and in our lives today. I know a couple of faces. I popped in at some gatherings prior to this one. Free pizza always helps. But in order to make a few more introductions or maybe establish that I have a few more friends in the room, I'm going to see if there's something that we have in common here. Here's some details about me. I grew up in the country. Did anybody else grow up in the country? How about like the sticks? I mean boondocks, redneck sticks. Not south, but just... Okay, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. If you ask me where I live, I literally don't live near anything. That's where my childhood was. I enjoy playing acoustic guitar, electric too. Anybody guitar players? A couple guitar players? Very cool. I live with my headphones in. In fact, on the way here, I was driving in my car, had my headphones in. Any of you live with your headphones in? What about your smartphone? How many of you, pretty regularly, even though your phone is not in your pocket, you feel it buzz with an imaginary text message coming in already? Okay? I call my smartphone my pocket brain because my brain is full of holes. There's too much information to hold in there, so I put it in my pocket instead. Is there anybody else here who is a twin? Okay. I'd feel all by myself then, except I have a twin, so I'm never alone. Has anybody changed majors since you started school after high school? Okay, me too. Any of you changed majors twice? Any of you think you're going to be in school forever? There's one. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Are any of you pretty shy? Actually, if you're shy, you don't have to speak up or raise your hand because you are shy. When I was younger, I was quite shy, and somehow I got hooked on talking to people, and I morphed. I transformed from a very shy person, rather an introvert, and now my high is hanging out with people. So I am married to a girl named Rachel, and on Friday night she says, John, I'm an introvert, let's sit down on the couch and watch a movie, and I will say, let's go out and do something, find some people to do something with. So I'm glad to be here with you all tonight and to be sharing my story and my experience living in this crazy world that is filled with what I call hyper-information. We exist in a world of information overload, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, but something else that makes a challenge for people of faith living in today's culture isn't just the amount of information that we have to consume every day. It's also the fact that you were born into a postmodern world. Now, depending on how into culture or into philosophy you are, postmodernism describes much of the general thought processes in the world that you live in. Maybe because you live in this world, you think this way, you are a postmodernist. A postmodernist basically says there's no such thing as absolute truth. There's only various valid perspectives, different ways of looking at the same thing, and you can be looking at the exact same truth principle or truth claim and come to different conclusions about it because knowledge or information is not objective. Everybody can have their own opinion, they can be different, and they can all be valid. So as people of faith, when we talk about the identity of God, more so than ever really in recent history in American culture, it's kind of difficult to wrap our minds around and have conversations and find unity with other people about what the nature of God is and what it means to be people of faith. Finally, the reason that brings me here personally is that I've been lost. As a person who grew up in a world of information overload and a postmodernist, I found myself lost about, I'm guessing, at the place where you are right now. My mom and dad provided me with a very comfortable, secure, great loving home to grow up in, and so I knew who I was when I was in grade school. When I headed to high school, I had 3 older brothers. One of them was my twin, and I just did whatever they did. I was the youngest of our pack of 4. There were other kids, but we ran as a pack of 4. And by the time they got into college, I had been following them my whole life, and suddenly they split in 3 directions. Went in different career paths, different schools, and I was left thinking to myself, what am I going to do? And I really didn't know. And that's when I wasted thousands of dollars on my freshman year of college, where I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't handle personal responsibility and freedom very well. I wasted time, money, and I got the worst academic grades of my entire life. I felt pretty lost. It was also at that time where I needed to start figuring out who I was. I was no longer just a follower, but if I had to decide, where is my life going to go? If I'm going to follow a brother, which brother? If I'm going to train myself in some career path, what do I like to do? What do I want to do? Why should I choose this career path over that career path? And that's part of the reason why I jumped majors and I jumped schools. And I eventually found my way into a full-time career that has been fulfilling for me because I like to help people find good things that I've discovered in my life. So if you're here tonight for free pizza and you're not too interested in spiritual matters, that's great. We're glad you're here. If you are deeply devoted to some religion or a deeply devoted Christian, we're glad you're here. But my assumption is that we're going to come from very different backgrounds, and there's a lot that we don't have in common. But one thing we do have in common is we all live in a world that searches for what really is true, and there's a lot of different opinions about what that is. We live in a world where information is just skyrocketing. This is a clip from Time magazine, and you can't see all the details, you don't need to. All you need to see is this orange line. Is anybody here in computer science or IT studies, our tech people? If you are, you know that this is one of the most rapidly changing landscapes in our world, because I was born here about before the first Apple IIe in 1976, and now we are here in the exponential curve of how much computing and thinking power our machines can do for us is skyrocketing exponentially. We live in a world that is facing more abrupt change than at any other time, we think, on planet Earth. Your generation, you're sitting in this amazing time frame, and I want to show you some important dates of how the world has changed and how the spot where you are exactly right now in this room, you are at the cusp of the fastest the world has ever changed in the history of the world. So for history majors, you know that there was something called an agricultural revolution. As far back as written history goes, we saw agrarian society until something happened called the Industrial Revolution. We knew how to build slaves. We knew how to build machines to do work for us. And shortly after that, it only took about 2 generations, great-grandpa to grandson, great-grandson, until we figured out how to use artificial light. And then you could work not just when the sun was out, you could do work anytime you wanted. After that, a generation and a half later, all of a sudden we left our planet. Watch these years. 90 years to get from artificial light to the moon landing. 22 years later after that, we learned how to talk to absolutely anybody on the planet. If you got a smartphone, you can Skype, you can call somebody in China or Asia right now, the exact opposite side of the world, and it's just amazing the communication we have. 9 years after we learned how to talk to anybody on the planet at any given time, the human genome was sequenced, and we began to understand all the information that makes us human, but we didn't quite understand or find in there the answer to why we exist or why we're alive. So sometimes that information doesn't help. A Harvard scholar said this about the world that you live in, a world of hyperinformation. He says, once capacity is surpassed, additional information becomes noise and results in a decrease in information processing and decision quality. Having too much information is the same as having not enough. Do you ever feel like that? Like you go to school and there are so many details that are just dumped on you, and either they bounce off or they go right through. I had an amazing history prof. He taught me about the ancient Near East and all of the birthplace of civilization, and I wasted some more schooling and some more funding at that time because I didn't get anything out of that class. Then I saw the world began to change. After I changed to a pre-engineering major, I got my TI 85, and I learned that my chemistry professor did not care if I knew the information about what the formulas were, how to make conversions. All I needed to know was to figure out how to access the information. So I literally could put all the answers in my TI-85, I'd sit there and take my test, and if I knew how to scroll the screen and pull up the right memory banks, I could pass the test. And that was okay because our professors understood that we live in a hyper-information age. There's too much to know, so the trick is, if you can figure out where to find the right answer, then you're good enough. You don't have to memorize everything. But this is difficult because there is now so much information available. We have internet access just about any point. The last time I went to the library to look something up in the encyclopedia, I guess I don't ever do that, because if you have a question about anything, you Google it and then you find it on Wikipedia. Right? And that's where we get our information. The trick is that in your world you have so much information in front of you, sometimes it can be hard to figure out what the good information is. I wonder if any of you or someone you know has been harmed by information you found on the internet. We had some medical problems in our family, and one of my family members researched it and realized and was told to sprinkle some heavy metal silver dust into their wounds because it would help purify the wound. And just the information that this family member was talking about came from the scariest corner of the internet. If you have any fear, all you have to do is Google it, and the internet will validate your fear. If there's anything you want to be told about yourself, all you have to ask is it okay for me to be this? And if you ask the internet that, you'll get a yes. You'll be told anything that you want to know. It's not necessarily trustworthy. So 9/11, today is the 12th anniversary since this tragedy, and the world has changed. We are now in a world of hyperinformation. So this is my daughter, Abigail. That's her first day of school picture this fall. And Abigail will no longer go to the library or open, microfilm at the basement of the library to figure out what happened on 9/11. Abigail will Google September 11th, Twin Towers attack, and one of the biggest hits she'll come up with is a video documentary called Loose Change. Are you familiar with this? Could you anybody describe what loose change is? Go ahead, please.
Basically about a conspiracy theory about 9/11.
Yeah. It's a conspiracy theory that the American government, being the people in power, controlled information and knowledge and made the United States think they were under attack so that they could pass new legislation and give the executive branch of our government extra powers. And basically it was a power grab. So we crashed our own planes into our own buildings so we could make more laws and get more control over our society. And if you ask the internet, what was 9/11 all about? You'll get many different answers like this. Conspiracy theories. We live in an age where if you're under 30, you get Inception, the movie. If you're over 30, you don't. I'm just enough over 30 that I do. Inception, you're familiar with that? How many different layers of reality did they go down? It was the same people, same circumstance, but they kept on digging into different types of reality. We live in a world where if you ask the internet, we went to the moon, or maybe we didn't. Maybe we didn't. If you check out the photo lighting and just really know how lighting and cameras work, maybe we didn't go to the moon. The United Nations, you can find that this is actually a one-world government front whose job is to gain complete control over the food sources so that when the world starts to become overpopulated, the UN can insert disease-causing genetic strains and stuff into various food sources and control population growth in centers of the area where people are taking up too much supply. So in our world, because we are postmoderns, our world is, and because there's so much information out there, we're naturally attuned to trying to find the story behind the story. There's a story behind the power people at the United Nations. There's a story behind why the NSA is tracking civilians, right, and phone calls. There's a story behind the moon landing. There's a story behind governmental power and governmental actions. Well, as we talk about God in the information age, when I grew up, my instinct was to find the story behind the story. I wanted to find out what was actually true when it came to some of these big questions like, why am I alive? What happens when I'm not alive? And what's the point of being alive? The thing is, to ask questions like that in a hyper-information age is like asking the internet, hey, what was the real root cause of September 11th? Because you're going to get some difficult answers. And even if you're very serious about it and you make a church tour and talk to people of faith and ask you, hey, tell me about where I came from, where I'm going, and why I'm alive. Even in our city of Milwaukee, you're going to get 300 different answers. So this is a challenge to find God in the hyper-information age. We are in a time where it's difficult to find reliable information. If If you would ask the internet who is God, it actually won't be truly very helpful. Now, as I tell you my story about living as a person of faith in the information age, I'm going to start with a piece of pie. The reason I'm starting with this piece of pie is because I tried serving one to my daughter. She is young. She hadn't ever tasted blueberry pie before, but she knew, looking at this blueberry pie, there was something menacing about it. So she told me, "I don't like it." And I knew she had never had blueberry pie, but she didn't like it despite the fact that she hadn't tried it. So this is an example of prejudice, a preconceived notion about what something is or what its value is before you actually experience it or have any realistic data on it. Well, this piece of pie is similar to the way I grew up, a country kid, coming of age in a postmodern hyper-information age. This is my house. If you'd ask me where I'd live, I'd tell you I live in the middle of nowhere. If you'd ask me what it's near, I would say it's near nothing because I literally lived in the middle of nowhere. I grew up in a family. My mom and dad lived out in the country. There's nobody else there, so they didn't have anything to do, so we had a big family. They procreated in their free time. And this was a picture in front of a church. My dad served in a spiritual role. He led a faith community in very, very rural Minnesota. And so when I grew up, that's the world I knew until I got lost. Until I really came to college for the first time, because then I realized that I only thought I knew about the world, but I hadn't actually studied religion at all. I hadn't taken my first philosophy class. I hadn't taken my first comparative religions class. I didn't know much of world history. I just assumed that everything my mom and dad told me about the way the world worked was the way the world worked. And then suddenly I realized they hadn't told me all the options. They hadn't given me enough information. And that's when I realized I was eating off of a spoon. Now, the hands that held the spoon and fed me my truth were very loving hands, and they were very well-meaning. But to be honest, they lived out in the middle of nowhere and didn't have anything else to do. So maybe they hadn't taken a comparative religion class and asked the deep questions about the way the world worked. So about the time I got to where you're sitting in your life, I was about your age, I started trying to figure out what actually is true about my identity, why I'm alive, what happens when I die, what I'm supposed to do in the meantime. And so instead of signing off and just not caring about some of the deepest questions of life, I decided to investigate what had been fed to me. I guess I had a curious mind, but my mom and dad had told me it's important to know who you are and why you're here. And so I decided to go figure out who I was and why I was here. The first place I started was with this balloon of Christianity. Like a little kid, my mom and dad had given me this balloon and said, "Here, this is very important. It'll make you happy. You just hang on to it and protect it and cherish it, and you'll do just fine." And now I have this balloon, and I'm not living at home anymore, and I'm taking philosophy and comparative religion classes, and I decide it's time to see what this balloon is made out of. So what do you do? What do you do if you want to see the strength of a balloon? Well, you start to poke it. And that's what happened to me in my early 20s. I started to poke the balloon. And I poked it in a bunch of different ways, but I want to tell you some of the stories that have most benefited me in moving from somebody who is lost to somebody who feels like he's found his place, who's found his reason for being alive, and I feel like I know where I'm going. So if you are here tonight and you're not sure who you are, you're not sure why you're alive, you're not sure where your life is headed, I want to share my story with you. And I am a pastor in a church. My job here is not to convert you if you don't want to be converted, to not make you a Christian. My job is to help anybody who is here who is looking for confidence and certainty about their personal identity and some of the deep questions about life. I want to share with you things that were helpful to me. So here's some of the historical reasons why I know that I'm loved, I'm not an accident, I'm actually an immortal. There's an enemy that the human race is fighting. It's called death. And we've figured out a lot so far. We haven't beaten cancer. We haven't beaten Alzheimer's. We haven't beaten Parkinson's. We haven't beaten death yet. But I believe that I've discovered an answer to death. And if something like that is real, it's just life-changing. So I'm going to tell you my story, some of the history. If you dig into Christianity the way you would dig into a conspiracy theory, you'd actually start looking for the story behind the story. The first story is the church. You go to a church and you hear somebody talk, somebody like me, and maybe you like the church, maybe you don't, maybe the people are nice and maybe they're mean, and you get a preconceived notion about the church. But if you dig in deeper, you realize that the story behind the story is actually everything flows back to one individual named Jesus of Nazareth. And so I decided I was going to go figure out what Jesus of Nazareth did, and if I poke him, is he going to pop like a little balloon, or am I going to discover something else there? So I went to dig out Jesus of Nazareth and to see what I could find about him from history. And so I studied some of the Christian texts, including the Old Testament and the New Testament parts of the Bible, written over about 1,500 years, but I also went to the University of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Yeah. All right, there, Mike. Great. I'm going to get paid even more now that I get a prop. Ann Arbor, Michigan. And the reason I went there is because they have an amazing ancient manuscripts department. They have history that is more than 1,000 years old. So I decided I was going to see when in history Christianity got invented, because if I could figure out where it started, then I could figure out the motive of who created it. Whoever creates the myth, a postmodern viewpoint would say, somebody creates a myth so they can gain power. The United States government, the conspiracy says, created a 9/11 terrorist attack myth so they could gain military power and become a police state over a nation. Now, I'll let you try to figure out that one on your own, but when it comes to Christianity, here's what my world told me. My world told me that Christianity is manipulative because it's an institutional religion, it's an organization, and that if you just pay enough attention, you're going to see that throughout the years, whoever was in charge over time actually changed the teachings and the mandates of the religion, and that the Christianity we have today is only because people changed it alongside at various points in history. And so I decided to go test that and to see what Christianity was like 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago. Now, by this time, I'd gotten pretty far in my liberal arts education. I knew Greek, and I had a Greek New Testament, a collection of old letters and biographies about the person of Jesus Christ. And I went to go see this. This is Papyrus 46. It's an actual handwritten copy, not a copy, it's an actual handwritten with ink on mashed papyri that has parts of the New Testament in it. So I wanted to see, from the Christian literature I'm reading today, what's the difference between where it started and what I'm reading now, because I was told that there's been a dramatic change, that Christianity and truth evolves over time. 1,900 years apart, there's going to be a lot of different perspectives, and instead I found the identical content. So this helped me understand that maybe there's a consistency of truth, and that things weren't being manipulated over time the way I had been worried about. I also had the opportunity to head down to the Chicago Museum of Art, the Art Museum. Has anyone been there? Okay, yeah, cool place. I love the lions down there. They have lions from Ghost in the Darkness. But I went there to see the Dead Sea Scrolls because they're some of the most important historical documents ever. Now, I already had an important historical document. This is called the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. It's a German-edited version of the Hebrew Bible. And I also had seen something called the Aleppo Codex, which was dated just about 1,000 years earlier. And then in 1946, in Qumran, basically in Israel, a shepherd boy discovered fragments of an old historical document that had the same content that I was told was in here, and that I was told was in here, but now we had a document that was 1,000 years earlier. So my book was 1,100 years apart, and I could compare those and they were the same. But now I had something 1,000 years older than that, and now we had the opportunity to see just how much these manuscripts had manipulated the truth. And the answer was they were identical. So this began to teach me that maybe the history I'm reading about the person of Jesus Christ was not a myth. Maybe it wasn't manipulated. Maybe it was the way things actually happened. And so this now is what I believe about the Scriptures, the Christian Bible that I read, that at any point in time, well, we'll get to that in just a bit. At any point in time, if you go back up to the days of Jesus and his apostolic authors, you just find consistency of teaching, and that's important. The other thing that I noticed is that the Christian Scriptures are built into a world that's different from this. Do you know where Peter Pan lives? Never, never land. And how do you get there? Where exactly is Never, Never Land? If you'd want to go visit, you'd need the help of LSD or something, because you just can't get there. The world of Christ, the world that this Jesus of Nazareth, the story behind the story of the church, the story behind the story of God, he lived in a world that was built on earth. The places he walked, you can go see. I've taken, I haven't got to fly there yet, but I've taken DVD and photo tours of the area. I've seen the maps where he walked, and I've realized that Jesus was built into real history. That was important to me, to see that not only was information about the person of Jesus Christ not being manipulated, I also was able to see he walked in a real world, and I can put my foot on the same step in Jerusalem where Jesus put his foot. All right, but it was also important for me as I asked, what is the Christian worldview that my mom and dad fed me on a spoon? How is that helpful to me? It's been said that nowadays nobody is on a truth quest anymore. Nobody's searching for truth, but a lot of people are searching for help. And even if their truth is made up even if it's a placebo, if it helps give them peace, it's good enough. So this has been true of me in a small way, that I've found in Christianity, not only is it historical, but it also matches my human experience. It resonates with me. Someone had said that scattered throughout our world are echoes or ripples of God's identity. And if you pay attention to the way our world works, you're going to learn about how God works. Jesus taught this a lot. He took plants and said, hey, do you understand how plants work? That's how God works. He says, hey, do you understand how a loving, forgiving Father works? That's how God works. He said, hey, have you seen a dead thing come back to life? That's the kind of thing God does. So when Jesus talked about guilt, it resonated with me because I know what guilt is. Do you know what guilt is? Do you have one of these? A skeleton in your closet, something that is threatening to your personal reputation, something your mom and dad would go ballistic if they knew, something that would get you dumped, kicked out of class, something that maybe would land you up in jail. We all know what guilt is, and guilt is a concept that's embedded deep into the Christian message. But it's not only guilt. My instinct is that something has to be done about personal guilt. That it's not good enough just to have feelings that there's something broken inside of me, but I also need a sense of justice to deal with it. Jesse Pinkman from the movie the series Breaking Bad is going to talk about the reality of guilt in our lives. Now, do you know anything about Jesse Pinkman? Okay, at this point in time, Jesse is a murderer. He was a drug dealer. Things escalated. He's now a murderer. And he's in a rehab group for drug addicts. And his counselor is helping Jesse find peace with himself. And he's not going to find peace with himself. This video clip, Jesse Pinkman struggles with the reality of guilt. It's a pressure that pushes on him. And it's what the Christian message talks about as being the voice of the conscience inside me. And when I look at my life, I know what it feels like to have to hide from people because of my behavior. I know what it's like to have to not be honest because of something I've done in the past or something that's built inside of me. So this resonates with me because I feel that way too. Another way that I believe the balloon of the Christian worldview that my mom and dad gave me will not pop is because my human experience resonates in a sense of gratitude. This is a picture from up north right now. It just looks like some dots, but this is the sky. I remember very clearly the night that I laid on my back and looked up at the stars, and I had a weird vertigo moment where I felt like the world had tipped upside down and I was looking deep and just about ready to fall off the earth into the stars. When I was in college, I started asking myself, why would I bother to say there's a God if he never bothered to introduce himself to me? And walk up to my room and shake my hand. And then I looked up and I saw those and I said, somebody put those there. The Christian authors say in the scriptures that the heavens declare the glories of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And when I look up at the stars, I have a sense of awe, and I feel like I got to tell somebody, whoever put those there, they did a good job. It's just an instinct of gratitude that I have. The same thing happens when you bite into a peach. You ever bitten into one of these? Can you imagine the perfect peach? You bite into it, what happens in your mouth? Just the juice goes in, and as you eat it, I mean, this thing is perfectly designed to put a smile on human beings' faces. It's like whoever came up with this, I got to tell them how good a job they did. Do you see that's the human instinct? We look at something that's really good, and we're like, oh, this is so good. I have to worship, I have to praise whoever made this. I understand that gratitude, having a sense of appreciation for generosity, is a unique power on the earth. When I was in school, in your position, about where you are, I was married, I had a new kid, I was working 2 jobs, I was going to full-time as a student, and I drove a Honda and the alternator went out and I needed just about $800 and I didn't have it, and a good friend said, "John, I'm going to loan you $800 and you can pay me back never." And to this day, Aaron Miller is his name. If you ever run into Aaron Miller, that's the friend who showed me what generosity is. And that act has something undeniably magic about it. True generosity is a virtue that's worth celebrating. And the scriptures tell us that when you run into generosity, that's an echo of what God is like. And so if God is a God of generosity, and I'm so happy when someone helps me get my stupid Honda back into shape, well, I think I might like this God. God is the God who gives me a gift like this. I believe that a human being finding another human being that's physically and emotionally and intellectually compatible is too much of a miracle to be random. And if you've been in love and you've felt the draw and the perfect connection with somebody else, and you said, "Man, this is like a drug that's legal and I got to celebrate it," I see things like this and I feel gratitude. And then the most important one is what I hear from friends and Christians at my local faith community, at my church out in the suburbs. When somebody tells me, "John, you've got messes in your life, but God has forgiven your sins. He's done all the work of fixing them, and you can start over new today with no regrets." Those words have magic for me. They hit me in a spot where Mountain Dew doesn't hit me, and I really like Mountain Dew. So there's power here. This resonates with me. The heart and core, guilt and forgiveness, a new beginning, mercy at the heart of the Christian message. Just fill me with appreciation. And I feel moved to thank the who behind the what, the story behind the story. But I also find resonance in my life, the human experience that I've had with grief. The worldview that I see around me is a worldview where things break down. If you leave a house by itself, it won't improve itself, it will decay. The same thing happens with people and relationships and tomatoes and cucumbers in your fridge, they decay. And unfortunately, the same thing happened to this woman by me in the picture. We experienced grief. Here's the story. My wife was injected with a huge amount of bee venom in the back of her neck. And a couple of days later, she started feeling like she was getting bit. So she looked for insects, and every 6 seconds or so, she felt like somebody was taking a pin and sticking it into her body at a random spot. And at first this was annoying, and then it started driving her crazy. She couldn't sleep, and the only way she could sleep was if she was heavily medicated. And this was about the shape that we were in after a year of my wife becoming a voodoo doll for some peripheral nerve problem. And this is the kind of time where you wonder, what exactly is God doing here, or is there a God here, or what's going on? And I realized at a time like this that to have this problem and no God means you have a problem. But to have this problem and a God means you have a meaning and you have hope to get out of it. Jesus talked about how suffering makes us more compassionate for other people. He talked about how suffering builds up endurance. If you're one of the guitar players and you want to become a better guitar player, you got to build up your callous fingers. Mine are callous right now. And you can't really play guitar unless you've got the strength of fingertip. And the only way to get your strength of fingertip is to hurt really bad for 2 weeks. But after that, suddenly you elevate, you level up to the next level. And Rachel, after a year, we found the right doctor, we found the right diagnosis, and we survived it. It was hell, it was a blur. I almost quit my ministry. That was probably the worst year of my life. But now, my wife is stronger. She's got this resolve. She went from being not a runner, now she runs between 5 to 9 miles a couple times a week. She's done a bunch of half marathons. And because of the depression that she went through, we were able to help another family member whose life tanked through some catastrophes. And I believe that God used this voodoo doll experience to train her so that she could rescue another family member who probably would be dead without her. And suddenly, I've got pain, yeah, but by having a God, I have an answer for it. There's a famous, somewhat famous story of a father, and the father went to a doctor's office and put his son in a headlock while the doctor tortured him. It was just the worst thing you can imagine. I mean, getting a boy, however you do a headlock, I'm not wrestling you. Do a headlock, and your boy is screaming. And the way the story turned out is his kid had a vicious ear infection, and the doctor had to lance it to get it out. So this dad is sitting there, he's got his kid in a headlock, and his kid is screaming, no, 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 no. And the dad put him in that position anyway because he knew it was the path forward. That's the message of Christianity, that sometimes it seems like God has us in a headlock and there's pain in the world, but in Jesus Christ we're told it has a purpose and we have relief in the end. I've learned this when I spent a little time over in Asia. This is a woman named Emma. She lives in Shanghai. And Emma was born this tall up to her waist and that tall beneath it. So she scooted around on a little dolly on the floor. If there's ever somebody who had a reason to rebel against the concept of a caring, intelligent, powerful God, it was this woman. And she was the greatest beacon of love and service to others ever. So she would sit on her little mat on her little floor and knit little booties for babies. She'd sell them in the crummy alley down her street, and then she wouldn't keep the money for herself. She'd give it to help poor students who were trying to make their life better down the street at the school. And Emma was just a wonderful inspiration to me to see what the human beings can do with pain when it's, well, this might be a little harder. You can't see this very well, I don't suppose, but I'm sitting in a couch right here, and I'm looking at, can you see a hospital bed? Can you see this? There's a digital readout. This is the foot of a hospital bed. Can anybody see what the word is? It's off. In this particular case, it says off because the woman in the bed, she's off. That's my mom. About 2 weeks ago. When I walked in that room, I saw my mom dead, and my mom was usually full of joy, cheerful, but she had fought with cancer, and her cancer didn't hurt her, it just paralyzed her. Imagine being buried in concrete that set from your legs and slowly worked its way up. Cancer did that to my mom. She became slowly paralyzed over time from her toes up until it came to her body, and then she only had her head and her left hand left, and then her left hand stopped, and then her head stopped, and then everything stopped. And when I saw her, when everything stopped, rigor mortis had set in. Her jaw was open like this. One eye was off to the left, blank. The other was cross-eyed to the right. It was a horrific sight for someone you love. And I walked up to the bed and I stared at it. I stared at my mom, well, the container she used to live in, because I sensed this is a moment that is too powerful to ignore or pretend doesn't happen. Inside the Christian scriptures it says there is a cause and a reason for the end of humanity, and it's sin, and sin leads to death. And in our world, we don't always see death because we hide it away, but that day I stood and I saw death take somebody I cared about very much, and it turned what left behind into a monstrous corpse. A few days later, I was out at the cemetery, a beautiful white pine casket with simple daisies. We lived in the country, daisies were perfect. And at that moment, I realized it is not good enough to smile and give hugs. We need an answer to this. And if there is some sort of answer to this kind of thing, then it is very important to find it. And in all of history, I only know of one person who has the general reputation of being able to solve the death problem. And that's the guy I read about in these historical manuscripts that I saw at the University of Ann Arbor and in the Chicago Art Museum. That's the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus said that he knows how to get rid of death. So if you know how to plant a tulip, you know how to plant a tulip, right? You take a little brown thing and you stick it in the dirt and then you cover it with dirt, and if you wait long enough, that same group of matter and molecules will come up in a different form. It'll smell better, it'll have color, and it will be green. And Jesus said, if you've seen the miracle of a tulip, through the Apostle Paul, who wrote Corinthians, he said, then you know my solution to death. I look in my world and I see tulips can pull it off. And then I read history and I'm told that Jesus pulled it off. And we haven't figured out how to do it at Fredert or St. Luke's yet, but I believe that history has attested to Jesus having an answer for death, and that resonates with me because I don't like it when my mom dies. And how important it is to have an answer for her, my children, much less myself. So in a world where we say resurrections are impossible, if resurrections are impossible, then Jesus didn't rise from death. But, if Jesus rose from death, then resurrections are possible. I start here because I start from history. There's a lot of people who start here because they start with philosophy or human experience. They believe, if I can't do something, nobody can. But I believe there is someone who's more powerful than me. He was Jesus, and He came back from the dead because He was truly God. He was the Son of our Creator. And if Jesus could rise from the dead, then resurrections are possible too. And so at my mom's funeral, we celebrated life. Human experience. These things are so important to me, and the fact that Christianity builds in the deepest answer I want in my life is important. And, this isn't illogical. It's very easy to figure out if a resurrection happens or not. You start with a dead guy, a living guy. You make him dead. You make him alive again, and you have lots of people pay attention and verify it. And that's what happened about 30 years about 33 AD, so 2,000 years ago, an event changed the entire world. It changed the face of the world. So many people were convinced of it that this incredible movement came out of nowhere, hit just about every civilized continent on the earth, and everybody wrote about it. They shared notes, they compared, their stories were the same, and they put it into a collection of writings called the Bible, and that's what I read today. This is so good news. The result is a world-changing, death-beating movement that I'm blessed to be a part of. And this is important because it's historical. It resonates with my human experience, and it offers me hope, peace, and purpose. If you're here today and you have so much information, not just from class, but you look at the church world or the faith world, and there's so many different options out there. I would encourage you to keep asking the questions and do what I did and find a balloon and poke it till it pops, and if it doesn't pop, you stick with it. Because that's the balloon I found in the person of Christ and in the message of Christianity. What an amazing thing it is to have an answer in a world that has lots of bad answers but very few good ones. I know where I am, I know I'm alive, I know where I'm going, and I know what to do with death. So if I could pour a little bit of that into you, if you're looking for hope or purpose or an answer to some of the big questions, if you're wondering what to do with your life besides make your own career and make lots of money and beat your roommate to your first Beamer, check in with God and see some of the ideas He might have for what it means to be a living, breathing, hope-filled, peaceful, purpose-driven person. All right, I went a little over my time, I'm guessing, but thanks. There's a lot of my story in here. You all have your own stories. You probably have story of grief or suffering or questions. Remember, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for rightness or righteousness." So if you have questions about God and you're hungry to find answers, it's not a sin. It's actually a sign of somebody who has a heart that's looking to the sky. So God bless you on your journey, and I hope that you can find or have the same things that I've been gifted with. All right, thank you.